I believe that the future of Los Alamos is going to come down to a decision between more plutonium or cleanup. And what I base, and presently the bad news is that things are leaning towards plutonium as we speak. However, I'm confident that with citizen pressure, we could actually convince it, or more particularly, both federal and state political leadership to compel Los Alamos to clean up. But first, I'll spend my first 5 minutes dwelling on the bad news and then move on to the good news. But with respect to plutonium at Los Alamos, you know, through the course of working more than 20 years on Los Alamos and nuclear weapons issues, I've come to realize that Los Alamos is really more a plutonium lab than anything. And in a way, the weapons mission is actually secondary to that. And some of the evidence that I have for that is back in 1996, Los Alamos was formally declared by the U.S. government to be the so-called Center of Excellence. And this is the typical Department of Energy jargon and doublespeak, Center of Excellence, which itself is highly debatable. But the point is that Los Alamos is the nation's designated laboratory center for plutonium work involving weapons and more. Now, to be accurate, there's more excess plutonium at a site in South Carolina. But still, when it comes to the cutting edge in the current work on plutonium, nowadays it's all about Los Alamos. Now, I already said that in a way the weapons mission is secondary to the plutonium mission, but focusing on the weapons mission for a moment, it's also the nation's only facility for the production of plutonium pits, which are the fissile cores of nuclear weapons. And that mission was formally done at the notorious Rocky Flats plant, which was finally shut down by an FBI raid in 1989 investigating environmental crimes. And so that mission was relocated here. Now, many of you, most of you will be aware that for the last decade, we've been struggling against a huge new plutonium facility that the Obama administration wisely has decided to defer for the next 5 years because of exploding costs. But first of all, in the event that Romney gets elected, expect that issue to come back almost immediately. And then the acronym for this facility is CMRR. It's in the news a lot. But what that facility is all about is creating an expanded plutonium pit production complex at Los Alamos to produce up to 80 of these plutonium cores on an annual basis. And I could give a long rap on the reason why, but that expanded pit production is all about the eventual production of new design weapons. So it's actually critical, you know, not only for the principle, but I believe in practical geopolitical terms, it's essential that we shut down the possibility of there being expanded pit production at Los Alamos so that this country does not re-engage into industrial scale production of new weapons. That's just a bad geopolitical example. Now, being mindful that I have only 10 minutes, I leave the weapons issue. I get into another plutonium issue. And on the 10th of this month, the legally required public comment period ended for a proposal that'll bring up to 2.5 metric tons, added metric tons of plutonium to Los Alamos every year until 2034. And then the only reason we found out about it is at 2 p.m. on October 10th, when the public comment ended on this public process required by the National Environmental Policy Act. On that very day, the federal government finally put online the reference documents that support their entire public process. So, you know, in theory, we're supposed to submit comments by midnight that day. They put up the reference documents at 2 p.m. And lo and behold, buried in this one obscure document is this business that I'm talking about right now. 2.5 metric tons of additional plutonium coming to Los Alamos every year until the year 2034. And the purpose of this plutonium coming to Los Alamos, you know, in theory, it's a good thing. It's a so-called non-proliferation effort in which the laboratory will basically disintegrate the plutonium pits, turn them into a plutonium oxide, send them to the Savannah River site in South Carolina, at which point that plutonium oxide will be incorporated into nuclear reactor rods, fuel rods, to be burned up in commercial power plants. Now, the problems with this are manifold. The safety of it, of burning plutonium, currently they're only burning uranium in reactors for the most part. Safety is unknown in the reactors themselves. The third unit at Fukushima was burning some of this plutonium fuel rods when disaster struck. The consequences of that is still not yet known. From a geopolitical perspective, it's just a bad idea to introduce plutonium into the commercial market. And then coming down to the local level, safety is a real issue at Los Alamos, and specifically at its plutonium pit production facility, which would also have to incorporate this expanded mission involving 2.5 metric tons added of plutonium every year. There is an independent safety board commissioned by Congress, and I have good things to say about that board, but that board has been pressuring Los Alamos to de-inventory its plutonium, to have less materials at risk, that's a legal term, but to have less materials at risk because in the event of a severe earthquake, which is possible, there could be quite a big dose to the public as things stand now. And we don't need another 2.5 metric tons of plutonium. So now I need to move to the good side. First of all, I think we need to be realistic about what the future can be for the laboratory. All of the politicians, I shouldn't say all, but commonly politicians are always talking about jobs, 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 and that basically the budget at Los Alamos generally has to be supported without qualification. Now, in my view, the research, production, and testing programs for nuclear weapons, I think, are going to shrink over time, and that is a good thing. But it's going to result in job loss, and we should be realistic about it. What could, in part, compensate for that would be augmented non-proliferation programs, treaty verification, and the like. Not the plutonium program I was just talking about that would introduce plutonium to commercial reactors, but there's other programs, non-proliferation programs, that are truly worthy of our support. But I think, Nuke Watch thinks, that the biggest potential area for job growth is in cleanup. But this is going to involve a lot of politics. And I mentioned earlier during Q&A with Peter that the Environment Department is due to make a decision on how the biggest waste dump, radioactive waste dump at Los Alamos will be cleaned up. And I addressed this in the yellow sheet that I handed out. This dump is known as Area G. It's been in operation since 1957, long before the advent of modern environmental laws. That has the implication that we don't truly know what's in it, although it has been estimated to hold up to 18 million cubic feet of radioactive waste. Now, the real job creation would lie in actually going in there and excavating these wastes. That is not what Los Alamos currently plans to do, and our indications is that the Environment Department is going to concur with that. What the laboratory basically wants to do with this dump that covers some 60 acres is to cap and cover it, or as a witty colleague of ours calls it, hide and hope. But cap and cover it, put a fence around it, and call it a day. And we're talking, for example, where one of the major constituents in this dump will be plutonium-239, which is the magic ingredient for nuclear weapons. And plutonium-239 has a half-life of 24,000 years, and therefore it's dangerous pretty much for 100,000 years. But nevertheless, the current plan is to camp and cover, put a fence around it, and call it done. Now, if we could convince the Environment Department, and my favorite way of getting things done is to get somebody else to do it. So what we need to do is to get state and federal leadership to pressure, I believe, the Environment Department to make a cleanup decision that actually requires going in there and excavating the waste. And I can occasionally slip into political rhetoric and jargon myself, but that would be a real win-win for New Mexicans. And I'm hoping every politician in the room, please be free to borrow this phrase, and I'm not going to copyright it for my own personal use, but to go in and clean up Area G, which is believed to hold 80% of total buried waste at Los Alamos. So to go in and clean up Area G is to substantially clean up Los Alamos itself. But to go in and clean it up would be a real win-win for New Mexicans in that it would permanently protect the environment, permanently protect groundwater and the Rio Grande, while creating hundreds of high-paying jobs over the next couple of decades.
Hey, Jay, Peter, do you want to comment on anything Jay said?
I should finish because we're filming
we
this.
We have one more.
Yeah, and then we'll take Q&A. And again, I'm sorry for the filming, but we're trying to do a twofer with our limited resources. But I'll close with our thinking. My own thinking about this is somewhat seminal at this point. Part of this is still coming off of the long struggle that we and others had to defeat that new plutonium facility. But now that it looks defeated for the time being, although we have to be careful about it, but Nuke Watch wants to shift its focus and help create kind of a political coalition, social coalition with others who are interested to actually bring about the political momentum towards compelling both the Environment Department and Los Alamos to substantially clean up Area G and again create hundreds of jobs. And if you're so interested, I didn't want to pressure anybody, but you know, please sign up. I'll be talking. I have to pick on Peter since he's our local representation here. But I'll be talking to Peter. I'll be talking to Brian Egolf and others within the state, and also the Environment Department. I should mention that there is an existing alliance of 7 municipal and county governments, and now it also includes Owenge Pueblo. But this is the so-called Regional Coalition of Landed Communities. And they have gone at least twice directly to Washington, D.C. to lobby Congress on Capitol Hill. They've been to our own New Mexico congressional delegation there. I don't claim to know them well, but I'm skeptical about them. It should be mentioned that David Koss, our mayor, bless his heart, is currently chairman of this regional coalition. And I know his intentions are good because we have talked about it. But the danger is that this regional coalition, which was originally conceived to support augmented cleanup at Los Alamos, but there's been a tendency for that to bleed into general support for Los Alamos's budget without qualification. And the way I can sum up Los Alamos, the lab's budget, is despite what it tries to project as window dressing, just a hair under 2/3 of its total institutional budget goes directly to core research, testing, and production programs for nuclear weapons. So follow the money. But we have to be careful, again, about this regional coalition that its predecessors existed, for example, at Rocky Flats. And were you to go to the website for this regional coalition here and look at their fact sheet, they tout the fact that at Rocky Flats, a similar coalition was able to achieve quick and fast cleanup, which really, I hate even using the word, it's not even cleanup. At the Rocky Flats plant, they only dealt substantively with the top 3 feet of dirt and left everything, virtually everything else underneath. They didn't touch it. And we're talking about buried pipes that had carried liquid plutonium and the like. So I view the regional coalition as potentially a dangerous entity that will give a political blessing to doing cleanup on the cheap at Los Alamos. I know that's not David Koss's intention, but I warned the mayor on this. So again, to close, if we want to permanently protect the environment and create hundreds of high-paying jobs at the same time, let's go in and do comprehensive cleanup, not only at Area G, but also at the other radioactive waste dumps at Los Alamos. So.